Most anger is outside awareness. By the time you're aware, it's already in an advanced state. Know your physical signs. Your body responds to all forms of anger with distinct changes. If you're used to suppressing anger, the changes may be very subtle. A slight increase in heart rate, flushed feeling in the face, slightly tightened jaw, tightness in the arms, and so on. Think about a time you got angry. Pretend it's happening right now, and then describe the sensation, however subtle it might be, in your head, eyes, mouth, jaw, neck, shoulders, chest, stomach, back, and hands. It's really important that we recognize these physical signs because they occur long before you know that you're angry. Questions never to ask yourself. Is my anger or resentment justified? Do I have a right to be angry or resentful? Of course you have a right to be angry and resentful, and you have a right to justify it. Those are the wrong questions. Instead, you want to ask yourself, do I want to be angry or resentful? Is it good for me? Is it the space I want to occupy in my life? Do I cope with discomfort, disappointment, hurt, or failure with blame, denial, or avoidance? Do I like myself when angry or resentful? Does everyone in my family feel safe, respected, loved? Anger is a protective emotion. It's activated by a dual perception of vulnerability and threat. That's in all animals. The more vulnerable they feel, the more threat they're going to perceive. That's why wounded animals are so ferocious. That's why hurt people tend to be so angry. In modern times, the threat is mostly to the ego, far more than to the body. Someone says or does something that offends your ego, makes you feel devalued. Best way to eliminate this kind of ego fragility is strengthen your sense of who you are, what you believe about yourself, and what is most important to you. Once blaming and devaluing become habits, they work on autopilot. They're automatic responses to discomfort. At that point, the emotional system must be reconditioned to move automatically from a devalued state of anger or resentment to a feeling of core value. Instead of automatically blaming, you'll automatically try to improve your experience in all situations. How to use core value to transform emotional states. The goal of core value work is to build immunity to feeling devalued, and that's by other people or by circumstances. As you practice core value skills, thoughts and behavior that improve your experience multiply, and immunity to feeling devalued grows. Other people may try to devalue you, but will hardly succeed because you'll recognize their behavior resulting from their low core value and you won't internalize it. When you do feel devalued, and it will happen sometimes, you'll remain in a devalued state only if you devalue yourself or others. To devalue is to make something or someone unimportant or worthy of inattention, derision, contempt, or harm. Devaluing keeps us trapped in a devalued state, blocks positive emotions, and worsens whatever experience you're having. Behavior in devalued states dismisses, manipulates, controls, dominates, exploits, or abuses. It's self-destructive and harmful to others. When you feel devalued, access your core value before you interact. Don't let the interaction regulate you, because it will not. And if you're devaluing, you'll certainly make it worse. And you access your core value by trying to improve, make something a little better, appreciate something or someone, connect to someone, can even be mentally if you can't do it physically, and protect someone. Vulnerability that stimulates most anger and resentment is some form of anxiety, especially about being discovered or exposed. The formula is anxiety plus blame equals anger or resentment. We're living with an epidemic of anxiety, but not all the anxiety we experience is bad. Good anxiety tells us to pay attention. Without anxiety, we could be killed crossing the street. Good anxiety tells us to improve self-acceptance, because we're probably too self-critical. Good anxiety tells us to improve self-care. We need to sleep well, eat well, exercise, practice self-compassion. Good anxiety tells us to improve friendships. We're more anxious when feeling isolated. Good anxiety tells us to improve love relationships. We need to be more compassionate, kind, loving, and fair. With bad anxiety, all discomfort means that something terrible might happen, and you won't be able to cope with it. Bad anxiety results from habits of assuming the worst about people and situations. Fortunately, habits can be reconditioned. Core value reconditioning prevents bad anxiety. It keeps you focused on your strengths and your resilience and your extraordinary capacity to improve and cope with any misfortune that might occur. Certain traps of thinking both intensify and prolong anxious states. Trap number 1, nothing's important. Don't sweat it. It doesn't matter. This attempt to reduce anxiety will more likely lead to something you don't want. Conflict avoidance. You try to avoid any kind of conflict, just go along to avoid an argument, and that's sure to breed resentment. Low value creation. You don't want to really appreciate anything because it's going to stir anxiety. And if you don't appreciate much, life starts to lose meaning. It leads to depression eventually. And in very extreme cases, it diminishes the will to live. Trap number 2, only peace matters. When you're very anxious, you really want to be at peace. That's understandable. But passion also matters. The human brain requires a certain amount of intense stimulation. If we don't get it positively by standing for something or protecting someone, we'll get it destructively through anger, aggression, thrill-seeking, or other risky behavior. Better anxiety reducers are interest. Try to find something to be interested in. Focused attention. When you are interested, it's much easier to focus your attention. Your brain can't scan, which it has to do in anxiety, and focus at the same time. So to reduce anxiety, focus. And intentional behavior. That means act proactively. Know who you are and what you want and act accordingly, regardless of what's happening around you in your environment. To transcend anxiety, view it as a yellow light, not a red light. It's not telling you to stop. It's just telling you to be careful. You're crossing a boundary, doing something different. Figure out what bad thing might happen. Learn more about it. How likely is it to happen? And if it's probably going to happen, develop plans to cope with it. the ruins of love. Anger leads to criticism, stonewalling, cold shoulders, defensiveness, ruins sex life because you begin to see each other as opponents first and eventually as enemies. Doesn't let you let down your defenses, and true intimacy requires letting down defenses. It makes loved ones seem like opponents, creates a condition of walking on eggshells, and leads to contempt, emotional abuse, and divorce. And it begins doing that by starving the relationship of compassion and kindness. Those are the lifeblood of relationships. They can't survive without compassion, and they can't flourish without kindness. Resentment has a built-in retaliation motive. When chronic in a relationship, some degree of verbal or emotional abuse is inevitable. So if you're resentful, you are most likely verbally or emotionally abusive in some way. And if that's the case, you're going to need the Love Without Hurt boot camp, which is a blueprint for personal healing. How to turn resentment, anger, verbal abuse, or emotional abuse into compassion. Think healing and quality of life. You have a right to be angry, but you have a more compelling right to heal and lead a value-filled life.